think I need that. I don't normally need that. Thanks for coming. What I want to do, I'm assuming, although this is one of the regular open forums that we're going to talk about space, although I'm sure, like your session on, I guess Friday of last week, there'll be some discussion of override and other pieces as well that people will want to raise. So let me take you through where we stand on space. And I guess I would refer you to, if you haven't seen it already, a document that we have up on the website. I tweeted it out. It's, I think, all over the place, called Short-Term Space. Needs an option. If I put my glasses on, I can actually read that. And so some of what I'll use from this document. And so if you don't have a copy, you really should get one, because it really focuses you on what the school committee has in front of them as we're looking at the space issues for next year and really through 2020. So if the document does anything, I hope what it does is shows the interconnectedness of all of these decisions. So there's nothing here that's about any one school. Everywhere I go, people make the conversations about their school and their school only, and while there are certain schools, as you can see from the document, and you're one of them, where the issues are a little bit more acute and a little bit more immediate, this document's really about how all of these space issues interconnect. So I want to take you through where we are now and what I mean specifically by that. So right now our focus is on Devotion School. Devotion School was approved last week for its renovation at the School Building Authority to move to schematic design. So we're focused on that project. And chief in that focus that the school committee's asked us to focus on is getting as many students out of the building as possible. In fact, all of the students, if that's possible. So we already have a plan, if you've seen this document, to move 6th, 7th, and 8th out of the school while that project is going on. And under one of the scenarios here, we actually can add 2 grade levels moving out at the old Lincoln School. So one scenario is move 4th, 5th, and 6th, 7th, 8th out of the Devotion School to the old Lincoln School. Keep them there for the time of the project. And that ends the discussion about the old Lincoln School. That fills the old Lincoln School for that period of time. So that would end that as a discussion item. It actually doesn't help us that much in the project because it still leaves K through 3 in the building, and it's a pretty intricate project. And so what we've been asked to do is look for other spaces to move K to 3 to. And we're looking even outside of Brookline now for some place to move the K to 3 from that school to. Because if we manage to move all the students out of that building, we believe that the project is less expensive, and we believe that we save a year on the project. Now, why is that important? In 2019 or 2020, depending on whether you believe the assistant headmaster or me, I tend to believe him on this, we have a problem at the high school with enrollment, and we need additional space. If we don't have Old Lincoln School available by 2019, then we have to look at other strategies for dealing with that high school enrollment crunch. And I'll go through what a couple of those are. But under this scenario, where we use Old Lincoln School exclusively for devotion, there's actually a good chance, that we'd have that project done in time to then use the Old Lincoln School for the high school. While that solution, long-term solution, was being developed, probably to be finished, these are rough time frames, by 2021. Okay? But at least there's another building that we have to use for high school classroom space. If that's not the case, Then we start getting into alternative strategies at the high school in 2019 or 2020. And those include things like larger class sizes. Those include things like modified schedules, and I'll come back to that in a second. They include things like running less courses, those kinds of strategies. That's all that would be left to us, because we wouldn't have any additional room to put the students who were coming to us by that time. So what do I mean by a modified schedule? Well, the story's been told all around town, so I'll tell it since it's my story. That we've looked at one idea of that. I have a colleague out in Washington State where their community waited too long to build a second high school. They needed a second high school. They debated it and debated it for far too long, and now the need for the second high school is upon them, and they don't have the second high school. They'll have it in 2 years because the project's now underway. But what they're doing in the interim is they're starting their student day at their high school at 7 a.m. They're ending it at 5 p.m., 11 periods, and they run a schedule where only 80% of the students are scheduled into classes at any period during the day. Okay? Now they make some special modifications for 9th graders, but for upperclassmen, they tend to gravitate towards sort of a morning schedule or an afternoon schedule, depending on their needs. That's one strategy. I'm not recommending it. I'm not touting it. What I'm saying is, that's one of the things that we have to look at if we don't have space at the high school by those years. So creating additional space for the high school at that point is important to us. Now, if the other piece of it is that if we don't have another solution to move all the students out of devotion, then what we're left with is 6th, 7th, and 8th from devotion at the old Lincoln School and additional space. So we have the Pierce issue that we're dealing with, and if you've seen this document, you've seen that in addition to the possibility of using Old Lincoln, there are other possibilities at Pierce. They range from a renovation of some office space that we have there now, to convert that to classrooms, and while it wouldn't be something I would want to put on the table for long term, it at least would handle the short-term measures while still overtaxing issues like the common spaces, the cafeteria, and those kinds of things would be horribly overcrowded as they are now. So we have those kinds of options there. But the options there interact with the options here, because if you choose to use Old Lincoln School there, you can't use Old Lincoln School here. Right? If you choose to put devotions 4th and 5th graders into Old Lincoln, you can't choose to put Pierce 7th and 8th grade or Baker 7th and 8th grade. So these things all interact and they have to be decided as a total. So back to the bigger point. The school committee has asked us by next Thursday to report to them on where we are with trying to find this additional space for devotion that would allow us to potentially move everyone out. If we find that, and we won't find it and have contracts and all those kinds of things by next Thursday, but if we locate something that we might possibly be able to use, then we would proceed down that track. And that would leave us looking at what do we now do at Pierce and what do we now do at Baker. The Pierce problem, if you've read the document, you know is a little further off. We actually have next year to try to deal with part of that. This problem we don't, under the assumptions that we're using now. So one thing I want to point out about the assumptions is that the assumptions don't assume any consolidations in this building. They don't assume that there'll be a consolidation anywhere from grades, I'll just make it grades 2 through 8. So they assume we need a number of rooms because we have 5 classes more. That's not been true, actually, for the last 3 years, where we have had consolidation. And you may not like those consolidations, but those consolidations, when we made them, all fell within the class size parameters when we made them.
Superintendent, can you define consolidations?
Yeah, it's where we have, let's say, 4 sections of a grade level, and through trying to figure out where the parents are going to be here, we consolidate it to 3.
Is that because of attrition?
Yes.
Leaving the district going into private?
Well, it's more, we've done some research on where people go. It's more moving than private. although certain schools, we have more private than other schools. So there is, well, let me try to finish this, okay? So, and then I'll just open it up for questions. So there is that possibility, although we need, again, given our assumptions, we need 2 sections. Dr. Brown, with Mr. Rowe, my Deputy Superintendent for Administration and Finance, have tried to look at some options within the building for whether there's an opportunity to create additional space. And quite frankly, what they've looked at, while I appreciate them looking at, start to do things like take up the library for classroom space, and I just can't sign off on some of those ideas that they've looked at. So it leaves us with other ideas. I mean, Old Lincoln is still here, but again, I've said if it's off the table because it's used for devotion. So that leaves us with longer term ideas like modulars, which cannot, under our understanding from our discussions with the town, cannot be in place for September. Okay? But there are some strategies that we could employ to get there. Those strategies would be use of a classroom in other locations. So if you've read the document, you know that we could identify a classroom space at Heath for the year. We could identify a classroom space at Runkle for the year. But they're going to fill up to their capacity in 1 more year past that. And so that's a 1-year fix. But it would provide us with the 1 year that we need to get to modulars, if that's the direction that we decided to go. So there's a lot of those kinds of things that interact with one another on the table for the school committee. And I guess sort of the overall thing that I want to make sure I said is just the timeline on that. And that is that, again, go back to, we've been asked to provide them some information at their meeting on December 4th. And these things are going to have to be played out in a fashion during December, because all of the expenses associated with these things have to go into something called the capital improvement plan. And the capital improvement plan has to be developed and in front of the selectmen, because it has to be approved by the selectmen. It has to be approved, the school pieces of it have to be approved by the school committee. It has to be approved by the advisory committee, the town's financial committee, and ultimately it has to be approved at town meeting. So we're already late to that capital improvement plan. So those things have to be put in place. So these kinds of recommendations, these kinds of options need to be laid out in some kind of plan so that the town and the deputy town administrator can begin to lay out the potential costs of these things. And we can factor not only what we may need to do this year, but what we may need to do next year. And let me give you an example of what I mean. I made that idea of using a classroom at Heath sound easy. It's not. We have to move an early education class out of there, a preschool class out of there to do that, if we were to choose that option. That right now we don't have a space for it. Because we've rented space at this temple, and we've rented space at a temple on Beacon Street, and we're out of space to rent at those places. We've used all the available space, all the space available to us for rental at those places we've used. So we have to look for additional places if we're going to rent for additional pre-K classes, that we would then use the rooms at those elementary schools for this short-term plan. So that's a good enough place to sort of stop and try to answer some questions. I'm sure I missed a ton, and I'll try to pick it up in the questions. Sir, you had a question.
Yeah, so your plans assume anything with Hancock Village, even if you don't assume consolidation, you're going to have some relief, but do they assume that that's going to happen? And if they don't, should you consider that?
So there's nothing in what I just said that deals with the long-term plan, right?
Okay.
This is all next year, the year after, and what we've plotted out even in this document just assumes our present enrollment trends. In other words, if you look at this front page, it says we assume 650 kindergartners come in every year, right? It's actually been more than that the last 3 years. So I'm a little worried about that assumption. But 650 kindergartners and 31 sections of kindergarten. We've only begun, and we're guessing when we even try to plot this out at what year we might get X number in Y year from a Hancock Village project. But right now, for us, it's all guessing because we get different numbers. We'll probably get a different set of numbers out of a meeting tonight. So, right, the long term still has to be dealt with. And just to the long term for a second, the devotion is piece of that long term. You know that in the town's capital improvement plan and plans that came out of the B-Space group, a Driscoll project was put in there. We don't have an agreement from the school building authority that they're willing to participate in that project yet. What we know, some of you have come and advocated for it, what we know is when we get to April of this year, we have to submit a new what's called statement of interest. In other words, what's our priority? And I can tell you right now, unless the winds change over that time, right, I believe that the project submitted as the priority at that point will be Brookline High School. Right, will be Brookline High School because you can see even in the time frame I laid out, if you don't start on that project now, you won't have it done in a timely enough fashion for it to do you any good when you need it. So those numbers haven't been factored in. Yes?
Hi, Dr.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yes.
I'm Mary Rakowski, and I'm a parent of a sixth grader.
Yep.
Perhaps senior in IEP.
Yep.
And so I kind of just want to ask you, like, I want you to wear two hats. Like, I want you to wear the parent hat and the superintendent hat when I ask this question. So short term and long term, you're smart,
Thank you.
If this was your child, do you see short term and then going into the long term, what the town needs to do is, in addition to possibly building a second high school, having middle schools, because that's come out at the town, I was at the meeting that happened at the temple, and there was also a meeting at the town meeting, going forward. Is this looking like what Brookline is kind of being forced into do, whether we like it or not, to go toward a middle school model? And what's your opinion on that? And or possibly a second high school like Newton has, two high schools. And there was conversation brought up about the hospital, Warren,
Yep.
yeah, that has been sold.
Yep.
And that may become possible, maybe some open land that is possible
Yep.
for another elementary school, K through 12 or K through 5. So, and as a parent, what do you prefer? I know personally, of course, every parent here has their own agenda because we're parents and we want what's best for a kindergartner to an 8th grader. But I know personally, we looked at a lot of districts that had very high special needs and special ed programs, and Brookline came out in front. And personally, what made the decision for us, because there were a number of districts with very strong SPED programs, was the K through 8 model. And so knowing that, and that's my bias, and I'll admit it's bias, and I love having my son in that kind of school, and I love that he has relationships that people have known him when he's younger, and
Yep.
that he's known people that he's going to go forward to. What is your opinion, knowing some of your background, of what you would like to see? More elementary schools, K through 8, middle school model. What do you think is best for the young people? If we try and keep that in front of our vision, that it's about the kids.
Right. So thanks for that. I hope I never take the parent hat off.
Right.
Okay.
I hope you don't eat.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, first of all, operating Old Lincoln School as another building, as another school for us, and the grade configuration that we've sort of chosen, it should never be viewed as abandonment in any way of the K through 8 model. Okay? But if we're going to operate a school, we're going to do it well. So what I hope is that people, I hope when Monica Crowley, who's the principal of that building, for when it opens, in whatever way it opens, I hope when Monica comes out, the crowd's this big. Because Monica's going to go around to our school, she's going to be at the school committee, and she's going to be able to talk about the kind of program they're envisioning there. We've had parents who've come to us and said, I'm not one of the schools being talked about. to go to that school, I'd like for my child to go there, I think it would best meet their needs. Are you going to allow students who aren't necessarily from devotion school to go there? If we have room, I hope the answer is yes. So we're going to run it, we're going to run it well, right? But our commitment is to K-8 buildings. Actually, our commitment is to pre-K-8 buildings, although it's going to take us a while to get back there. So, but here's an example to the point you raised. And I really appreciate the question, I really do. So, we were originally going to move 6, 7, and 8 from devotion to Old Lincoln. Parents, and it was going to be next year. And parents said, but the construction's not even starting yet next year. Why are you moving 6th grade? You don't need to. And I said, the reason we're moving 6th grade as well is because if you look at a number of the programs that we have in the building, those programs, particularly special education programs, are built by grade spans. And the grade span is 6, 7, 8. And what I'm afraid is that students, children, will be harmed by that decision if we don't move it that way. But I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go back and we're going to examine the data. And if we find that we can get away with only moving 2 of the grades next year, because we need the space at devotion, then we'll do that. We went back, revisited the data, saw that the 6th graders could stay with a 3-5 group, and that it would work numbers-wise, and so we made that decision. But we weren't going to make that decision if it harmed the programs for those students. So our focus is always, always on that program. I saw a question somewhere that was floated about, were we going to offer, special program? If Baker went somehow to Old Lincoln School, were we going to offer special education and programs? Yes. And they're going to be great. Right? In answer to your question. So, listen, my children went through my first set of construction projects, you asked the question, in Beverly, where we built or renovated 6 elementary schools, and they were all part of being relocated to another place for, whatever number of years we were building an elementary school. All of them, all 3 of them. My wife was really thrilled. And it worked. They were great schools, I think, and we renovated all of our K-5 schools and then had students back in them. And tried to run them to be really good schools. And they have a middle school system. There are advantages and there are disadvantages. I think one of the advantages that's happened here, strangely over the last number of years, that's actually worked to our advantage, is that our elementary schools have gotten larger, and a larger cohort in 7th and 8th grade allows people to do more programming. That's one of the advantages of middle schools. You have, in my children's school, 400 7th graders, and there are, more different kinds of programming that can be done. It's harder to do with 80 students, 60 students. When I came here, each school, 40 students. It's harder to do. So as our schools have gotten a little larger, it allows us to do some of that. But, so we're committed to the K through 8 model. We're committed to do it. Whatever we do with Old Lincoln or wherever we hold schools, we're going to do them well. I don't know the answer to the high school. I know what I think. It's not the answer necessarily, right? I think that education, and again, we've been through a concept study process on this. So I've actually seen some drawings, right? And building a high school on that campus for that number of students is challenging. That's as far as I'll go, right? I can go a lot further, but it's challenging. And I get that people look at the second high school and they begin to ask ideas like, would this be done geographically and all? I don't know. I don't know any of that. I don't even know if that's where we'll end up. I know we have a study going on now that's going to make some recommendations in terms of the program. In addition to looking at program, and that's all been focused around program, we've also started to look at traffic patterns and infrastructure in that area, which is difficult, right? And whether that will work and support that. But we're working at a speed now to try to get something in place that we can begin by 2019 so that we can, by 2021 or so, the high school issue is solved. Now, there's a potential here we're going to have an override and a debt exclusion in the spring. Many of us hope we do, right? You know, the high school's not part of that, right? There's another discussion about funding for staff and building coming, if only for the high school level. So I hope that was somewhat helpful. Yes?
Hi, I'm Marcy. I have 3 kids, just 2 at the Baker School.
Hi.
Hi. And thank you. That was really helpful, just hearing what one parent feels about the K-8 model. I know that I chose the K-8 model intentionally. I grew up in Newton, and I didn't see any benefit to the middle school. And I remember the first week I was here, actually, Dr. Brown talked about how special the K-8 model was, how the kids stay younger, and also how they're just good kids. And I just thought, because it was so helpful to hear from you, that maybe if there are other parents here in the room tonight who also moved to this neighborhood because they believed in the K-8 model, it would be helpful for me to see you stand up. We all know that's going on and that we're at capacity, but when will the long-term plan get started?
Right.
When we,
Okay.
I mean, we clearly need another elementary school.
Right, so let me try to address that. And let me just say a word to the K through 8. And as I said in that response, I mean, one of the reasons I came to the district, it's something we've heard through every study that we've done with every consultant. The piece I will say, the but that I will build in there is in the short term. In the short term, there's a line. I said this appears here today, and somebody said, "Where's the line?" And I said, "Well, yeah." So there's a line where some of the things that we might have to do within the building, right? That building's a little tougher in terms of bringing modulars in, but within the building, go over the line in terms of is this worth it? I mean, lunches, common use of common spaces, proposals that say, let's take 30, 50, whatever % of the library. I'm sorry, I can't sign off on that. We'll look for other solutions to keep the K-8 together. And we're certainly focused on that in terms of the long term, and I get that doesn't always do it for people who've moved here and only have this period of time, because building projects take a long time. So I want to say that, but to your question, so we're looking at an RFP right now, a request for proposals, for a consultant to look at available places. And that will start in the next couple months. I can't promise much more than that, because I don't remember when the interviews start. I think they're in the next couple of weeks, that kind of thing. So they'll put that in place, and what that's designed to do is to look at other properties and what it would be like to acquire those properties, the level of difficulty, for example, in acquiring those properties, and how they work in the school setting. And then there's already some testing that's been done. Some of you I recognize from the B-Space process, but there's already been some testing done about if you build an elementary school here, what would that look like in terms of redistricting and buffer zones and all of those kinds of things. Is it a neighborhood school location? All those kinds of things. So all of that would have to go in. And yes, they'll look at properties that we don't control and the level of difficulty of acquiring those properties. As I was at Pierce the other day, the conversation came up again about certain grocery store that's located near there, and why didn't we just take that location and build a school there? And that's called eminent domain, and that has its own complications and all of those kinds of things, right? But part of that also will be, I think, testing again this feasibility of are there other locations like this one where we might look at adding on? And what would this look like as a 5-section school? Do we want to do that with all the things that accompany it? I mean, one of the great advantages that we have at Devotion, where we are doing a 5-section, 1,010 students with 2 pre-K classes, and 5 sections of K through 8, is we were able to essentially, because we're building so much of it new, we were able to essentially start over in the design. And so we were able to design a building that is large and feels small, right? We're able to do that. You don't have as much of an advantage of if you aren't taking down 2/3 of the building, which is what we're doing there. So that process will start soon. That night school examination will start soon, and that will be public. I mean, big sections of that will be public. There'll be public reporting on and all those things that you can pay attention to.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, I'm Lauren Italiano, and I have a daughter in 7th grade, and I love that I can speak right up to you. Just full disclosure, I work for Newton Public Schools, and I work in a middle school for the Newton Public Schools for the last 15 years.
Careful now, we're on camera.
So I feel like, I also work at a high school in Newton now as well, but I feel like I can say with a fair bit of experience and credibility that while I loved working in a middle school, and I do, I'm so happy my child doesn't go to one. They do keep them younger. They also keep parent involvement. A lot of parent involvement drops off precipitously when children reach middle school. And when you're in K-8, you naturally stay more involved. I mean, I'm case in point, I'm here tonight with a 7th grader. I don't have any younger children. You also lose opportunities for mentoring and other ways that older students can be role models for the younger ones. But I also think there are less transitions, which is really important for kids who struggle with transitions in organization, executive function, and those types of things. So just a question. I'd like to know, since you've said 3 times that you're committed to K-8, there's nothing in writing anywhere about bringing K-8 back to Baker in the plan that you've mentioned. So I'm curious to know about that and just what your thoughts are about how the 7 and 8, would come back to Baker once they've been sent over to Old Lincoln School. If that, in fact, is the plan for what will happen.
Yeah, so, I mean, it says in the short-term space document that the huge disadvantage of that option with both Pierce and Baker is right now I can't tell you what the long-term plan is. I mean, when B-Space concluded, I would have said to you, the long-term plan right now, again, given the numbers that were in front of us then, which are different now, there weren't 692 kindergartners then, the plan was a Driscoll project that went to 4 sections, and that caused essentially a bumping, right? Throughout the district, it caused a bumping of Pierce students. That's how capacity was created there. It caused a bumping in a Runkle-Driscoll buffer that already exists. That's how capacity was created there. And then that bumping took place in buffers from Heath, Baker, Lincoln, right? It happened in that way. And that's what created the capacity. If Driscoll's not happening, and I just told you that there's a ninth school examination going on, I can't tell you the long-term plan. So I can't tell you the plan that under that 7 and 8 move would bring us back to 8 or 9 K-8 schools. I can tell you that's where we're headed, that's the goal, right? That's where there's been no discussion anywhere I've been since somebody put on the B-Space table, I know, let's build 7 through 12, right? That's the solution to our problem, which garnered us a really nasty letter from the MSBA, which had already worked with us to build 2 K-8 schools. They weren't happy about that conversation. There's been no conversation about anything but pre-K through 8 since. But I can't stand in front of you and tell you that I have the long-term plan because it simply doesn't exist right now. And that is the huge, I mean, say the same thing I said at Pierce on Friday morning. That is the huge disadvantage in using the using that 7th and 8th grade model in either one of these schools. Yep.
Looking at that, the Pierce district is walkable to Lincoln, and none of the Baker district is. What would be the advantage to having the Baker 7th and 8th graders go if we can consolidate and by the year with the shuffling around? It just seems to make more sense.
Right.
And I'm not trying to throw them under
Right.
the bus, but I'm just trying to, you know.
That's okay. They did it to you on Friday
Sure.
morning. So
But really, I don't understand, like, you know, if we're
They
all
really
so
did,
close
honest,
to space,
yeah.
and Mary does a great job every year. She comes out in August. We've done this. We've moved this around, and if, you know, it works.
So-
we know we're big, but
So this document says.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question was if I'll repeat the first part. If Pierce can walk to Old Lincoln, right, and we have these other strategies that might be usable here. Am I getting your question? Yeah, then, and we can't walk, then what? So this is a needs and options document. It's not a recommendation document, right? All it does is lay out needs and options, right? And it actually describes that here's the disadvantage to the point I was asked about there. The disadvantage is we don't have sort of the exit strategy here yet, right? And yeah, so right, they would be able to walk. I mean, if I, you know, there on Friday morning, they'll say, but yeah, we have this more permanent. And again, this isn't one school versus the other, although I'll go back to a point in a second where that becomes difficult, right? So they would say, we have this potential project using Sperber and all that can be defined, right? We don't have room for modulars, right? It's a much more difficult endeavor. So, right, the school committee's for recommendations from us is going to have to factor all of that in, right? And again, everything else being equal, we prefer to keep K-8s together. Now, I will say, you know, and this is our problem. So I'll just say it. Tim's heard me say this a couple of times. One of the other issues is, you know, if we're able to use the Old Lincoln School for a larger group of devotion, take everything I'm about to say and forget it. But if we're not, and I'm sitting on the finance committee, I'm going to say, let me make sure I understand this. You want to do, let's say I said, here tonight, you're all right. We should do Sperber and we should bring modulars. If I'm sitting on the finance committee, I'm going to say, let me make sure I understand this. We spent $3.5 million to renovate the Old Lincoln, and you're going to do that project and this project and not fill that building. That's rather strange, Mr. Superintendent. Right? So we have that. Now, I don't think that's the problem we're going to run into, because I think we've got lots of options of how we might put students in the building, starting with that devotion idea if we're able to pull that off. So, right, and you're right, it's a matter of trying, it may be a matter of trying to get there, and if we start to piece these options together, I laid out 4 or 5 things, right? Maybe one consolidation, we've done that, right? Maybe use of that room at Heath or that room at Runkle for one. I mean, there are ways to get there. I would want to know that we have that longer term, meaning 2016, 2017 strategy in place. In other words, are we committed to the modulars? What's that going to look like? How do we begin to play that out? All of those kinds of things. Yes, sir.
So I have 3 questions.
Okay.
So the first is about K through 8.
Yes.
We've had several meetings as parents, and you know the consensus is obviously that K through 8. Everyone loves the K through 8. We're going to define it as a K through 8 experience a bit because we have the short-term issues. So nowhere do I hear what's the K through 8 experience if 7th and 8th graders go to Old Lincoln. How do you maintain the community, and are there things that we could do to keep that going in the short term? That's the question. So if you can comment on that, that's question.
Yep.
The second one is you didn't say anything about the Baldwin School because there's some talk about potentially kindergarten going there.
Right.
And the third is the modular was shot down by the town, but wasn't that you said they couldn't for September? Was it
For September 15th? Thank you.
So I think I read somewhere that there are trailer options that can go faster, that could be ready in short term. Was that part of the study as well, and was that shot as well?
Okay, so let me try. Monica Crowley, who's the principal at Old Lincoln, what we're working on are ways to make sure we maintain that experience with a devotion community that's going to be divided up. So they've talked about opportunities, and some of them are going to feel a little bit more forced, but there's a commitment there to maintaining programs with 8th graders and kindergartners that have been ongoing. So there's a commitment to examining what's been going on at devotion and keeping as much of it intact even during that time as possible, even if we end up in 3 different locations. I don't think we're going to end up in 3, but even if we end up in 3 different locations. I'm sorry, the second, Baldwin. So part of the problem, there's a couple problems at Baldwin.
Can you say what the answer is for everybody?
Pardon?
Can you just say what the option is for everybody?
So the question was about the Baldwin, which is actually in the options, was a question about Baldwin School and whether we could move, well, it'd be kindergarten there. So there's two or three issues. First, we have a program there, a high school program there called Winthrop House, which is a program for students who are transitioning back into high school, have medical issues or social emotional issues, and so that's a very valuable program to us. It would mean finding another space that we don't have, and if we lose a program, not only do a number of students lose their opportunity to attend Brookline High School, but it costs us a lot more in out-of-district placements, which is where they'd end up. The other program that's there is not ours, but it's a Brookline Children's Center program. It is a lot of children of our staff members who have their children there, and they're there during the day, and then they drop them off in the morning and pick them up. It's one option for them. It's a good option for them. It enables a lot of our teachers to come back to work earlier than they would have normally come back, so it's a good program. So even if we could figure out the move of those two programs, and that would be difficult given that we don't control a lot of space, the building's not handicap accessible. And so we've begun to look in terms of a little bit longer term at what we might do on that site. I mean, many of you, again, who've tuned into this from the beginning of B-Space, way back in season 1, right? You know that we've looked at that site in terms of lots of things. Is that another building in terms of the high school configuration? Is that the place for another elementary school? Is that someplace that we build on to Baldwin, make it handicap accessible? How much would that cost, and what benefit would that provide to us? It still moves students off of this campus with no long-term answers. So in many ways, it's no different than, other than it's students who haven't yet come here. Yes?
Well, not to propose that, but we've had some experience.
Yes, quite some number of years ago, this building has, yes. And so just even, so the sort of the parallel to that is this idea I proposed, right, about using other spaces in other schools for the 1 year to get to it, right? And that would be kindergarten. It would absolutely be kindergarten.
And then the other,
Yes.
the third was the
Sorry.
the non-permanent one.
Oh, yeah. So the conversations we've had, I mean, we've actually examined some other towns that have done modular classrooms in a little bit more, in a little quicker fashion. How's that? And a little less permanent looking fashion. I mean, this town, again, I came here 11 years ago, love working here. This town has a particular view on modular classrooms and how they should look. Neighbors give us many comments on how they should look and all of those kinds of things. And we've been through, just read the Lawrence story about modular classrooms and how we ended up where we ended up there. The responses we've gotten so far is that's not where we're going. Part of the issue, however, is dollars. It would require a reallocation of dollars or a reuse, I guess, of dollars within the capital improvement plan this year that, quite frankly, isn't going to happen. Parallel community, I mean, some of you may know Lexington, they have some growth. Their school committee actually asked for a special town meeting to move some dollars within the capital improvement plan to put modulars on 3 of their elementary school campuses, and the Board of Selectmen turned them down. I mean, that's the formal kind of process that has to occur. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I'm Joyce Walker. I have a 6th grader and a 9th grader, and I certainly appreciate the challenges of overcrowding and space issues. So I just want to get a handle on your viewpoint on the entire town of Brookline sharing kind of equally in the load of this responsibility of meeting that. So I would guess you're for equal kind of sharing the load, is that right? Or?
Everywhere I go, people say, we're being asked to share more than our load. Every building I go to.
Okay, but given that, it just seems to me, you've alluded to several times already tonight, that there seem to be some special exceptions. You've mentioned Driscoll. And so I just want to understand, what's the rationale? If you could please explain why they can actually say no on something.
So they can't. They did. That didn't stop them from saying, we don't want this to happen, but they can't. The project, the SOI went in, right? If that project doesn't happen, let me be clear, at least in part, again, with this 9th school examination going on, if that project were not to occur, it has more to do with the fact that the school building authority, which funds our projects at X%, in the case of devotion, more like 24, 25%, doesn't act on our statement of interest saying this is our #1 priority in a timely enough fashion, because we can only have one SOI at a time. What we know, because we've heard people, some of you, that quickly here now, so that this doesn't happen again in people's words, we need to turn our attention to the high school. So that's fine, and I agree with that. And in April, I believe we will submit an SOI on the high school, which I believe will be approved in the regular course of the MSBA's business. If Driscoll not happening has as much to do right now with the fact that we only have 2 MSBA meetings left for them to act on SOIs, and we don't have an indication that they're going to act favorably on that Driscoll SOI. So it isn't a matter of, it isn't a matter of people buying T-shirts or stamping their feet. Quite frankly, it's more a matter right now of whether the MSBA says, yup, we think that's a viable project that we think you should move forward on, and we're willing to participate. Let's get started on feasibility study. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, so I'm going to walk back there a little bit.
I have 4 children in the school district, 9th, 5th, 4th, and 1st.
Uh-huh.
Would you explain your feelings and your the options for our need for space in this school right now?
So it's actually in the document. It's actually in this document. It details under a certain set of assumptions that we've applied everywhere, short of having, another school option, a 9th school, the Driscoll project, whatever it may be, that we will, I'm going to put my glasses on, okay? That we will need 2 classrooms next year. I know next year's, I want to make sure I'm accurate on the beyond. We would need 2 classrooms in FY16, that's next year. 1 in FY17 the following year, 1 in 18, 1 in 20, and then some others beyond that. So that's the number of classrooms we would need. And whoever said this earlier, Dr. Brown with Mr. Simmons, our building department magician, and Mr. Rowe, my trusty, I don't know, he's right hand or left hand, have done a great job of figuring out spaces to create classrooms. They, however, are not magicians who can create common spaces. So hence our cafeterias, and that's going on in a number of our schools. So that's the need, and that we drove that by a set of assumptions which says we're going to bring 5 kindergartens in here every year. We're going to bring 31 sections in across the district, right? So we've looked at those numbers by those assumptions, and that's what we've used as the basis for those estimates. So for next year, we need 2 classrooms that right now we don't have. Yes, sir.
First of all, I'm a parent of 2 kids here. They're both in 3rd grade. And ultimately, one day, I would love it if they could participate in Dr. Brown's sort of social seminar that she runs for 8th graders. I think that's a great program in this school. But that's aside from that. She's been a terrific principal for us. I have a couple of questions.
Thank you for saying that.
First of all, I understand that I think all of us should be sharing equally. And this might be our turn to share, and that's okay. I mean, we're going to size out of the school. We've got to come up with a solution for our kids next year, regardless of how much we all like it. I would really like it if they could stay here modular or something.
Yeah.
But if not, our kids come first
Yep.
over our conditions. But it really does seem to me as if our projections of numbers of students within the system have not proven to
Well, you can
last
say,
very
go
long.
ahead.
They've been short.
Uh-huh.
Now, long term, I mean, at some point, these projections must level out. How big will our overall?
Oh, I hope you're right.
How big will the school system get to be? And what is the total scale of the total size? Because if we're all going to be asked to participate in some short-term solutions, we really have to start to see some long-term solutions that we can all get behind.
Right.
And it's really hard to get behind long-term solutions when we have absolutely no idea what the long-term problem is.
Right.
So do we have any sense for how many kids are going to be here in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? I'm not talking Baker, I'm talking the whole system. And when does that level out? What is the scope and when can we get behind
So here's my difficulty answering your question. The answer I would have given you 3 years ago is a different answer than I'd give you today, because we don't have growth, we have accelerated growth. So when I stood in front of groups, I think we detailed in one document that we distributed that we started talking about our growth in '07. For people who've said, when did this happen? Why aren't we just starting to talk about growth? We started talking about growth in '07. It was a different growth. We had just brought in a kindergarten of 500, and we were calling that growth. And we were talking about all of the issues associated with that, and there were issues. 2 of the last 3 years, we brought in kindergartens north of 680. Okay? This one, I think, was 670 and now is 692. Right? And what we know, by the way, is that our kindergartens grow between K and 1. So once they're with us, we actually have some patterns that can help us predict. Some of you have been at these wonderful presentations we've done with the lines and show, right? We can pretty much tell you what's going to happen to a class from the time it's in kindergarten through the time it graduates. And we've been pretty accurate straight out. What we haven't had as good a handle on is this kindergarten class, right? And there are lots of reasons. We've had people in 2 and 3 and 4 times. One group that helped us with our master plan. The first time I remember they helped us with our master plan, they gave us 3 different lines that were used, 3 different prediction lines. And people said that higher one, that's too high. You can't use that one. Well, guess what? For the next X number of years, that's where our enrollment was, at that line. So I think in the early days of this, there was some disbelief about, this is a bubble, it'll be over in 5 years. It isn't. It wasn't over in 5 years, and if anything, it's grown. And so, we're easily in the next couple of years going to be a district of over 8,000 kids. We were around 5,600 when I came here. And we're going to have a high school that's going to top out, over, just with students who are here now, of over 2,600 students. It was 1,700 when it hit its low point. And the building will not, under any circumstance, hold that number of students. And so we're planning with those numbers. We've updated some projections to those numbers of the 650. We're trying to be able to factor these other kinds of projects into that. We, of course, will have people help us with that, and have had people helping us with that, a number of consultants, like the great people who are helping us at the high school. And that long-term plan between that high school and Driscoll and/or Ninth School and/or additions that we're going to have to do in other places is coming. Devotion is a big part of that. It took a lot of time, and at the time when that all started, the growth, and some of you were standing here with me back in those years, the growth was focused very much in North Brooklyn. Very much so then, when we started that. And so we're going to have to deal with all of that in these longer term plans. But we're going to be, I mean, if you just take 650 times 13 classes, I mean, and a preschool program, we're going to go we're going to go over 8,000 students in the next couple of years.
It's not hard to do the math. But
Right.
My only point here is that if we can't get ahead on the leadership side, then some of the problems that we're seeing here is we're going to tear this town apart. It's going to be this school against that school, that neighborhood against that neighborhood. And that's not, I mean, we came here for a school experience for our kids, but we came here for more than that.
With all due respect to that, I'm not concerned about this school versus that school. I'm concerned about the people who benefit from the schools and the fact that that's about 17% in terms of their parents versus the other people, and them looking at the cost of those school projects and the cost of putting teachers in the buildings. That's what I'm seeing, much more than this school against that school.
My concern is that this school versus that school will make it harder to get overall community support for home variety.
Yeah, I hear that, although I think that a high school is a great rallying point because everyone's involved in that project. Everyone benefits from that project. So there's some karma to that being the next thing that we're going to take on. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir. I'm going to do, Mary, two or three more. Okay.
Dr. Rubini, thank you so much.
How are you?
I have a 6th grader and a 10th
Yes.
grader. And you know, every time that I walk in this auditorium, I see my daughter. I see the two of them. When I walk that hallway over there, I see the parents that I know. And there is a big sense of community. You showed your commitment to the K-12 model, but at the same time, you have to justify that that building that is being renovated, you use as the maximum capacity. You say, okay, committed to the K-8 model, and for all the options that you showed there, I really wish that the devotion moved from 4 through 8, because in that way, the school culture of devotion wouldn't be broken. When you cluster in one building, 300, 200, hormone crazy middle schoolers, it is different. What regulate middle schoolers really is the role model that they take in the K-8. And you know that, we know that. I'm concerned about the long term. I see that we're trying to carry water in a bucket with too many holes. And then we want to fill the bucket. I see that we are not ready for that. In 2012, it was a study about space and how we utilize that space, and the red flag was all over. And from 2012 to here, we don't see like we have a target. I see private schools, and I don't see private schools going to middle schools. Private schools move from K to 12, or they start in 7th grade all the way to 12. They create a culture, something that makes us human and really make us powerful. When we talk about shuffling kids because there is no room, we break that culture.
So thank you for that. Let me just say, one of the reasons that that we brought Monica's position on this year instead of in a year that we were going to open the school was to do that kind of planning. So while some of these other things have happened upon us much more recently, right, these other possibilities, that kind of conversation has been going on with parents and students and teachers at Devotion School with that principle to build that culture now, right? It's not the K-8 model. It's not what we want long term. It's not what we're trying to get back to by what we're doing in that bill or what we're trying to do at that project. But it's a good experience. But it's a good educational experience that we're trying to build. It doesn't feel like we've been doing nothing since 2012. Let me just say. I mean, between Devotion and what's going on at Lawrence and what's going on in terms of the B-Space process and override study process, it feels like a lot. And Devotion is a huge $118 million project. And so, but these things, as people said when they came to one of the school committee meetings, these things take time. I mean, when I say you know, we're looking at a high school that maybe, under the best of conditions, we can really get to in that 2019 timeframe. I've had people say, I don't understand why it takes so long. Well, because you're working with a state agency, because you have to go through the processing, right? So it takes time to plan those kinds of things. Again, I just want to go back to, we're going to try to look at these options. We're going to try to keep K-8s together if we can do it in ways that provide a quality educational experience for kids, right? And that doesn't mean lunch from 9 to 2, right? There's a point, there's a line in there where I have to say, enough is enough. We can't do that for the next 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may be. We have to look at other options. But we start with those options that try to make sure that A, we keep a K-8 together, and B, that we develop that longer term plan so that we can talk with all of you about what that longer term plan is in terms of the school.
I guess you got 2 more?
Yes, sir.
I would like to make a comment about the gentleman's comment, and again, I don't think it's a question. So I think that you and everyone here better brace for success, because a lot of the things were done very well by a lot of people in this room and many others. Brookline is a phenomenal community which we love, and a great school district, right? The fact that the publications come out, it's one of the best schools in the country or the state, etc. On one hand, it's great. On the other hand, it doesn't help, right? So, and what I'm getting at is,
You sound like me now.
but with all due respect to your comment about 17%, 83%, the property values grow here because the function of the schools being great and the families moving here.
Yep.
So someone needs to articulate to the former parents of kids attending the schools that it's not maybe as black and white. There's a lot of benefit to the overall community, not just to the parents and the kids.
There are a lot of people that know that and feel that way. Yeah.
Agreed. But strategically, the view is the number of kids will grow, and as a function of school being great, and my hope is everyone's looking at the long run, and dealing with the short-term fixes. Right now is
what I can take care of right now.
Agreed, but to the point made earlier, if all we're going to do is talk about short-term fixes.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree. Thank you.
Dr. McKinney, I was asked on behalf of some parents to have the last question. Is that okay, folks, if I take this?
Yeah.
So about 40 of us met last week to try and understand what's going on, and we very much appreciate your presence here. Sorry?
Louder. Thank you.
I'm Sarah Griffin. I'm the parent of a first and a second grader here. And I was asked, we had about 40 of us who met last week. Those who were there, do you want to just raise your hand? There were a bunch of folks. Others, I think, have been on some listservs. We're very concerned, obviously, about what's happening here at Baker. We appreciate you being here tonight. I think there are 2 things that the group wanted us to share. And one turns into a question. One was eloquently done in standing up that our commitment here is to a K-8, which you have expressed and talked about as a short-term, as a long-term vision. The parents talked about and were concerned about what the gentleman here just said, which is we don't know what the long-term is going to be, and the short-term solutions being engineered make a lot of us nervous that there is no long-term that is going to result in a K-8 here at Baker. And we don't want to be the only school in the district that is a K-6. The question that I would ask, and I'm going to ask people to do the same thing, which is to stand up, is whether or not you would be willing to come back and talk to us before a decision is made. We are just learning the options. We want a chance to understand and to give you some more feedback and input. And I would like you to stand up if you would like the superintendent to come back and talk to us again.
No, absolutely not. Yes, of course. I'll come back anytime I'm invited. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.